that means is when you send a message, for instance, like hello, what encryption does, is a technique for scrambling that message so that only the people or only the person you want to see the message can see the message. So how does encryption work? So when you send hello, for instance, the system that you're sending that message over encrypts hello using an algorithm. So there are many different popular algorithms used for encryption, and one of them is AES. So one of the first ones ever done was originated by Julius Caesar, in which he was trying to send messages to Augustus without the messengers knowing the content of the message. So what he did then was the algorithm he used for encryption then was to move every letter in his message by 5. So you shift the keys. So for H, you go 5 more letters to change what H is, and so on. So by the time you've scrambled hello, obviously, only someone that knows what that key or what that algorithm is able to read it as hello. So anybody, so on the internet, what will I say? The example of that over WhatsApp means if someone is on your server or on your network listening in on the conversation you're having, because when you type in messages online, you are having a conversation with another web server. That's what the computer says. So basically, that transformation is done on the computer quickly and then decrypted when the message gets to the intended receiver. So essentially, how this relates to, or how will I say this, the use case for encryption, it can be used to protect message on a website, maybe data that you have on a server, on a database, all of that, because cyber criminals are always looking for ways to get information, especially personal information, when we interact online. So the way this is done, the way encryption works to protect your privacy is that even when someone is listening in on the conversation you're having online, the person cannot make sense of what is being sent or what is being received or even sent back, except if they have the decryption key and access to the algorithm that is used to encrypt the data you're sending. And it's possible for them to have this, it's possible for an attack, a sophisticated cyber criminal to have some of this information. But what most messaging apps do is they use the highest standard of encryption, and then they use asymmetric encryption. Asymmetric encryption means that the key that is used to scramble a message when you send it is different from the key that is used to decrypt it. And when the message is being sent back, is the key that is used to, the key that you encrypt your response with is also different. So that means the computer is doing a lot of mathematical equations to do all that decryption. It's very, very difficult for a cyber criminal to be able to listen on that kind of conversation if asymmetric encryption is used. So simply put, think of encryption as where your message becomes a password and only the person that has that password is able to get the message that you're trying to send. I hope that's good enough for the listeners.
Thank you so much. That was really elaborate and enlightening. I think, Samuel, I'll just come right to it. Can you just share with us maybe popular use cases for encryption that, you know, more people or more of our audience can relate with?
All right. Thank you very much for the question. I think the previous speaker had elaborately talked about the concept of encryption. So before I give the examples, perhaps I should start with adding on to what she said about what encryption is. And to say that data has many states. It could be in use, it could be in transit, and it could also be at rest. So the chief purpose of encryption from time immemorial had always been to protect confidentiality or to protect information from unauthorized access. But what we are seeing these days is that it's evolving into another realm, that is anonymity. And one of the use cases for encryption in anonymity is blockchain, where people only appear to the public as a set of numbers, and those numbers having been a result of encryption. So blockchain is one use case for encryption. Another use case for encryption is the concept in privacy that we call homomorphic encryption, where you are able to process data or make use of data, even though you don't have to decrypt it first. So it helps you be able to deal with data that is in use, but then you deal with it without finding out what information is there in the first place. So another use for encryption is to be able to ensure that processing occurs, but then it doesn't occur with having carried out that computation of decrypting the information that has been encrypted. Another use for encryption would be your wireless networks. She mentioned AES, an advanced encryption standard, which is a symmetric algorithm that is used on Wi-Fi networks. So when you use your WPA or WPA2, you'd find that you would have to have a key that you enter to be able to have access to a wireless network. So encryption is quite widely used. Actually, at the present moment, it's difficult to even juggle your brain through what use cases for encryption are, but you would find it in places where you are trying to protect information from unauthorized access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. That was really amazing use cases there. So I think I'll just come right to my next question. Greg, my next question is for you. And I think I'll also, right after Greg, I'll also have Omolara answer that same question, right? They've shared how Samuelo and Omolara have shared, Samuelo and Worola have shared how encryption is really important to, especially communication, and Samuelo also mentioned blockchain, right? So we see that it's really critical to our communication in digital age. It's also critical to financial payments, digital services. So I think my next question will really be, how critical is the concept of encryption to privacy, especially with regard to the role of journalism, people's sources of information, human rights activism, and issues around whistleblowing? We've seen that in more recent times, government has been heavily investing a lot of funds in trying to decrypt data, ensuring that, I think even going as far as mandating telecom operators to, create like a backdoor for them to be able to get access to people's communication and exchange. How critical do you think the concept of encryption is important to human rights, important to human rights and generally digital services today, or digital economy as generally?
Thank you for the question. It's absolutely critical. Sometimes people don't realize how often they're using encryption. We all know WhatsApp is encrypted, but a lot of times when you are doing something sensitive on the internet, such as doing online banking or interacting with your doctor, that happens over encrypted channels. And in fact, almost 95% of the traffic on the internet is now encrypted. Anytime that you're engaging in a financial transaction, most medical interactions, you're using encryption. And when you think about it, when do you want to use encryption? It's when you're doing anything sensitive, which could be a communication with family members. It could be just the information about where you are surfing on the internet. And certain professions absolutely rely on encryption. You can't be a journalist without being able to protect your sources. And you can't protect your sources unless you can communicate with them confidentially. Human rights activists, obviously a very important segment that need to be able to communicate confidentially. And just as there are many people who must use encryption and many people who use encryption without even knowing they're using encryption, there are many schemes by governments to undermine the use of encryption. They do things like require licensing of encrypted services and impose onerous licensing requirements. They mandate insecurity, like backdoors, as you just mentioned. They tax the services that are encrypted. They try to ban virtual private networks. They combine direct access to a communications network with an obligation to provide decrypted information, which in an end-to-end encrypted system, you can't do. They require, they ban services like BlackBerry Messenger in Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of people who need to use encryption. And there are a lot of mechanisms that governments are trying to put in place to make it harder for people to use encryption. So these two, they don't mix so well. We at the Global Encryption Coalition, I'm on the steering committee of that coalition, we've come together to help people advocate for preserving encryption and for governments not to infringe on it, and for companies that don't offer it to turn to offering it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Greg. I love the fact that you mentioned that in as much as people are, there's more technology with technology is thriving on encryption, right? As well as communication. Government is becoming more ingenious with ways on how to weaken it. So yeah, that was a very solid point. Omalaria, we'll come to you on the same question.
Yeah, I think I would go from the angle of why encryption is important to human rights. It's it used to be that before, if you want to have a private conversation with someone, you can easily close your door and you will have the conversation and ensure that that conversation stays within that space. But of course, we're doing more things online. We're engaging online where there's assemblies going on online. There's forming relationships. And one of the most important things encryption helps to ensure is that privacy that you try to seek when you close the door in meetings or when you draft documents and then you put confidentiality in it. But beyond just right to privacy is also a key to other rights, like right to freedom of expression, for instance. So if you want to express yourself about the government at hand today and you want to communicate with a group of people, it's going to be more difficult if it's not encrypted. If you want to organize petition, which is your right to political rights, there's no way you can get that done if there's no encryption in place. Beyond that also is the fact that right to hold an opinion without interference, right to peaceful assembly and association. And these are the fundamentals of a democratic state, society and state. So encryption, as much as it's not a right, but the other rights that are already in place, like right to privacy, right to freedom of assembly, right to holding an opinion, all of this is important if we're saying we're in a democratic state, for example. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to then talk about encryptions or any other tool that enables the person to be able to you want to be able to control the information you put out there. If I talk to you, I want to be able to know that I'm saying this specifically to you, that you don't want it to go out of hand and then it's all over the place and you can't control it. And like Greg already said, it's important for people like human rights activists, like journalists, like whistleblowers to have sensitive information encrypted, especially in situations where a whistleblower is talking about something. In South Africa, for example, whistleblowers have been killed for information they've given out. because it's actually is about corruption, exposing corruption, relating to government, top government officials. So in that kind of situation, to be able to protect their identity, anonymity is important, encryption is important for the kind of confidential information they'll be releasing. And I think also beyond all of that is also, as individuals, I am actually in the class doing a second master's in public policy, and we're trying to learn about the fact that our data should be ours. We should be able to protect and control it. So, for example, as a woman, you want to be able to make sure that someone that's stalking you doesn't have access to your information. So it's very, very important, especially for vulnerable groups like children, for example. Like, you don't want the children's, like if you take a picture or if you talk about a child, you don't want their location to be known to every perv out there. So that's why it's important that encryption and human rights actually come hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omolara. I love the fact that you also mentioned how critical it is to even more vulnerable groups, right? So that's really amazing, solid point. But now that we've really established that there's a huge nexus between human rights and encryption, I've established how important the concept of encryption is to protecting human rights, privacy rights, to be more specific, right? I really want to go, so a lot of research that's on the internet is about how important encryption is. And then, while I was the research for I actually a lot of arguments also for the regulatory concept or every idea. And what really we see that a lot of regulators are advocating for weakening encryption because of, with the main reason being security and public safety rights. But really, how do we balance this, right? On one hand, the government is saying we need to protect people, right? We need to ensure that there's national security. We need to ensure that we're able to have access to certain kinds of data if it is important to save someone's life or important to national security generally. But on the flip side, citizens are saying, I want to be safe. I want to ensure that what I share with my friend or my colleague or whoever it is private to me alone. I want to have control of, I want to have control of my privacy. I want to really, really, live that right. So really, my real question is, how do we balance this right? Is weakening encryption really going to give us, or is it going to help national security? Is there really an argument for it? Because government keeps saying, oh, create a backdoor for us, help us decrypt data. But is there really a point to the argument? Does it really hold water? Or is there a way to balance that right? So I think I'll just come to, Greg, please go ahead.
I can start on that. I think what we have to look for are applications of encryption that address the problem that the government is trying to solve for. So, for example, government says, well, we have to have backdoors to encryption in order to protect national security so we can see what the terrorists or the bad guys are saying online. And yet, if you create a backdoor for that reason, well, the bad guys are going to use that backdoor, just like the government agents will use it. So that's not a good solution. But are there solutions? And then also we have to recognize that encryption is essential to national security. You can't have communications on a battlefield. You can't have communications between civilian leadership and military leadership be vulnerable to interception, which they are if they are not encrypted, or if there's a backdoor that, again, other people will discover and be able to use, not the intended user of the backdoor. So what we look for are approaches to the problems that the governments identify that don't infringe on encryption. Example, there's a lot that a government can do when it has access to metadata even though it doesn't have access to encrypted communications. It can figure out who's in a group. It can use patterns of entering a group and leaving a group to determine, for example, whether the group is involved in the dissemination of child pornography. They can do a lot with metadata. Another thing that some of the providers are doing, instead of succumbing to government demands that they not offer encrypted services, is to make it easy for users of their services to report objectionable content. So if you're using a service, or you're in a group, for example, and somebody sends something inappropriate, the company can make it easy or hard for you to report that person and to get them kicked off the platform, or at least have their communications blocked for a time. So those are just two examples of solutions that are being pursued without breaking end-to-end encryption.
I think for me, when it comes to the balance and situation, is that governments use the fact that national security as a carte blanche to want to just, to surveil everyone, to do surveillance on everyone, and that can't work. And also the trend we see is when government then make ad hoc and arbitrary laws that just spring from nowhere so as to have access to people's data and have access to their information. And I think one of the things that's important to note is the principles of legality, the principle of necessity, and the principle of proportionality, which the United Nations is actually promoting when it comes to the issues of, balancing national security, right to privacy and expression on the other end. Legality is speaking to the fact that there must be laws that have been discussed, that has had public participation, that speaks to the fact that this is a limitation, because whether we like it or not, every right has a limitation, right? And there's always going to be a limitation, but the limitation must be proportionate and must be legal. So that's why they say the principle of legality. The principle of proportionality means how much threat is the national security. So if the government says they're going to, like they did in Nigeria, where Twitter was blocked for everybody, I can't say the national security in that regard. Are you saying everyone in Nigeria is now a national threat, for example? So there's a need for the proportionality, and then the issue of necessity. There must be a real threat. In most cases, they are not real threats. So I think that's the best way. Using those principles and guiding them is the best way for the state to actually be able to weigh and balance it. And like Greg said, there are other options that are not intrusive. Using encryption, preventing encryption or putting in the back door is actually more intrusive than these other options that exist. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Omolara. I love the fact that you and Greg touched on lesser intrusive, options or other avenues to ensure that there's national security, rather than just going the easy way and wanting to, see what everyone is doing, right? And then Greg also mentioned the fact that a backdoor for one is a backdoor for all, right? So you create a backdoor for governments. It's the same backdoor that bad actors would use to, create even more trouble in the system. But I think I'll still come to Wurala and Samuelu on the same question. So maybe Wurala, you want to, give your insights to that question.
Yes, I'm just going to piggyback off what Greg said, that there are other tools. As a security professional, there are tools that allow me to carry out forensic investigation on certain systems when there has been a breach, for instance. Why are those tools not being used for government? Why can't the government use the same tools or a better sophistication of that tool to ensure national security? Secondly, he talked about the use of metadata to create a baseline and then monitor web traffic or will I say intrusive traffic on information systems. I'm going to give an example of something that happened last week or thereabouts on Twitter. I can't point to the particular incident, but there was a page that came up and the page was sharing child pornography. Within, I think, about 15 hours, that page gained 60,000 followers. And people saw what the page was promoting, reported the page, and it was taken down in less than 24 hours by Twitter. Now, the citizens, or will I say the netizens in that situation, exercised their rights and discretion to ensure that that kind of information is not being shared. How about you look at it from the point of view that maybe a nation state is trying to protect its citizens from that kind of intrusion or that kind of traffic online? The data that was found on people who followed and interacted or engaged with that kind of content within that short period, it can be used to create a baseline for making sure that those pages do not spring up again, or to make sure, or to monitor the kind of people or the kind of, what will I say? Yeah, the kind of people or even bots that, will I say, accelerated the number of followers on that page. So there are many other ways, except like so many practical ways to ensure national security and balance the right to privacy. There are many tools that can enable the government to do that without necessarily creating a backdoor. Creating a backdoor means, I mean, Greg already said it, you open it for one person, and then you've opened it for all. And we also need to take into account the fact that cyber criminals do not rest when they want to get certain information. They don't wait for you to tell them, oh, we've created a backdoor. So even if there was a way to create or open a backdoor for government to use, I can bet you that there is a cyber criminal, an attacker that is waiting on that system, on that network, waiting for a port just to open. So before you are even able to send the email to the government body that is asking for the backdoor, an attacker already knows where it is. And that attacker might either sell that information or even exploit that vulnerability in the system. So I would say that creating a backdoor or opening a backdoor for government surveillance is not and will never be a practical way to ensure national security or to protect the rights of citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I love the fact that you touched on, because I've been thinking about it a lot. I've come to realize there's a lot of self-regulation also going on the internet. Someone posts something that is not right or inappropriate, and you see people actually reporting. They don't even have to follow the page. It just needs to pop on their timeline for them to report it or request the digital service provider to take that content down, right? So there's also like a lot of self-regulation. I don't even think the government is paying enough attention to, right? But Samuel, I'll come to you with the next question. All right. So I'll use Nigeria as a case scenario. In Nigeria here, we have so many or numerous obligations, right, or mandatory provisions that we must register for. So, we have like the BVN. The BVN is a bank verification number. So all Nigerians are mandated to have a BVN. So when you go to your bank, you have to register with your bank and you're given a unique identity number. There's also the government's database, that's the NIN, right? So it's like a national identification number. You go there, you're also given a different number. And a couple of other, we have numbers everywhere. We have our driver's license, there's a unique number. We have, so various channels and huge amounts of data that can easily link someone to, or link a person to a particular thing, right? But there's been a lot of advocating for these numbers being used to do everything. So for example, I want to register or pay for something, I'm using a unique number to do that in such a way that payment or that particular transaction is traceable back to me, right? So there's been a lot of advocating for this unique numbers to be used for social media, right? So it means that, you know, the concept of anonymity no longer exists, right? If I post, I no longer have the advantage of probably just tweeting something anonymously or posting something on social media anonymously, or even having like different accounts to, maybe I just want to be recognized for this thing on this account and another thing on this account, right? So there's really no, the point is it would kill such advantages, right? So what's your take on that? What do you think about how important is anonymity to communication in today's world, right? What do you think about the point of the traceability, right, of people's accounts or people's profiles online to them?
Thank you for the question. It's elaborate, and I would first say that the issue is usually complex, and it's made complex because from a policymaker's perspective, they may be trying to resolve some certain policy problems. When you speak of SIM card registration, one of the policy problems that are being resolved there is apparently money laundering. The policymaker's view is that people you hide under anonymity to launder money. One person may get a SIM card and then use it for mobile money and then dispose the SIM card without the ability to trace the person. So you'd find that the Financial Action Task Force, one of its recommendations would be let SIM cards be registered so that we can be able to resolve this lack of traceability issue. But, you know, in implementing those things, the question always becomes, what then of the right to privacy, or rather a state of privacy that we call anonymity? Of course, admittedly, the right to privacy is not absolute. There are instances where it can be derogated. But the biggest issue is that it's not like the parties are not aware of the pros and cons. The biggest difficulty is implementing the safeguards that have been put in place legally to ensure that the right to privacy is not interfered with in an arbitrary or a disproportionate way. So you'd find that the policymaker, or rather the government, has basis for wanting identification, and that the recommendation when it comes, it would be setting out that safeguards should be created to ensure that privacy is protected. And more often than not, it is the disregard of those safeguards that then expose people to interference with their rights. So the difficulty with striking a balance is that the government often don't respect their end of the bargain, which is to act within the safeguards that would have been established to ensure that they act within these parameters to ensure that they are able to resolve problems tied to money laundering and anonymity. But you'd also find that the platforms that we use, if you read their policy, or rather their terms of use, their community standards, I'll take Facebook, for example. In their community standards, they discourage the use of pseudonyms. And like you had rightly pointed out, the use of pseudonyms is good for anonymity. I may want to interact with the world without being known. But if at all my interaction with the world would result in, an interference with one of my states of privacy, then it begs the question, how do I protect my privacy? It actually leads to, censorship of some sort, to say, do I get into this platform and exercise my freedom of expression, or do I detach because I'm not able to use a pseudonym? But then we also have to admit that when people join these platforms, they use pseudonyms, they usually cause interference of other people's rights, hiding under that anonymity. So this goes to show that anonymity is good as a state of privacy, but it can also have negative consequences for other people who are now having their rights interfered with because you are hiding under some anonymous name. So, but from the government perspective, it's to urge governments to ensure that they act within the parameters of the safeguards that are created for derogations from rights to privacy. But like I said, the biggest concern is that government often acts outside these parameters. So it may be that SIM card registration may be good for anti-money laundering, for protecting the integrity of the financial system, but you find that then it is used as a loophole to be able to satisfy other means and to do surveillance that is disproportionate, and it becomes inadequate for the purpose it was created for.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Really, really informative. I think I'll come to Omolara with that same question. What do you think about that?
I think the previous speaker has covered quite a lot, but the only aspect I would like to maybe just add to it is the fact that anonymous speech has always been necessary for activists and protesters. And it has also helped, in cases where you're trying to exercise your right to protest and be able to gather. And governments most times are always interested in interfering with this particular communication, which is then a problem. So that's one of the reasons why anonymity is very important. But like he said, as much as we have their rights, there are also limitations to the rights. So for example, people use pseudonyms or hide under this anonymity to actually be racist, to actually exploit others, to do so many things that are actually not good for the other citizens. So there's a need to then look at how do we then balance it out to ensure that it's not just blanket, like he said, it has to be proportionate. And I think what I like most is what Rurala said when she said that, the people that saw the particular page on Twitter reported it. Maybe what is important is then ensuring that the citizens are part of the governance structure, where you ensure participation, when you ensure civic participation, where the people themselves are the ones that report this issue. That then takes a lot. That then makes sure that even the government doesn't have to be involved in every civilian's matter to be able to ensure that we have this particular norm in place. So maybe we should work on civil participation more. We should work on more of people being interested in reporting matters and seeing that this actually then gets addressed.
Thank you so much, Omolara. I think that's really something worth looking into, because there's really the whole importance of the freedom of expression online as it is today. So I can imagine having an opinion about maybe the government of the day, and I want to tweet it, and I'm thinking twice about, or I want to share it on social media or LinkedIn or whatever, and I'm thinking twice about. There's something that links me to this post. Let me not just, let them not just come and pick me up tomorrow because I'm sharing my thoughts. So, people should have the right or ability to share their views without thinking twice or without looking back, because they feel like the government will probably be on their neck or they would be traceable before that for their opinions. And Greg, do you want to share insights on this?
I was just going to mention that the UN Office of Human Rights recently released a report about how important encryption is to the facilitation of other rights. People look at anonymity as a right to communicate privately, and it is that right, but it's a facilitator of other rights. If you can't do that, you can't speak your mind. You can't engage as well in the political process. You can't associate as well with others. So we look at encryption and the ability to communicate anonymously as a facilitator of other rights like privacy and free expression.
Thank you so much, Greg. Next question would be to Wuraola. Sorry, a minute. Okay, yes. So, like I mentioned, in Nigeria, right, there's the government maintains or asks several digital service providers to maintain huge amounts of database of of people, right? What potentials do you think is there for government or what potential do you think is there for the government in maintaining this database? Because instead of weakening or looking for backdoors for encryption, I think there's a whole lot the government itself can do with encryption in terms of storage and ensuring that people's personal data, people's information are kept safe, right? So what do you think, what potentials do you think encryption even holds for government and law enforcement agencies?
So your question is a bit loaded, but I'll try to break it down as much as I can. I'm going to maybe take us back a little bit to what was previously said by, I'm sorry, I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing the names of the panelists. Yes, so Samalo mentioned earlier that there should be a way for, sorry, apologies, please. So for maintaining databases by governments, right, I would say in general that we do not need to collect the same data multiple times across multiple platforms for the same reason, right? He did mention earlier about, making sure that SIM registration by different people does not collapse the financial system, which is also what has been used in Nigeria over time to ensure that, people are giving personally identifiable information to the government. So they've also come with the angle of preventing terrorism, right? Through those means. But what I would just drop here is this. Not too long ago, actually last year, someone was able to break into the database of the National Identity Management Commission in Nigeria, NIMC, that takes all our, that's basically the centralized ID system for Nigerians in Nigeria. And someone was able to get into that database and take information running up to about 60 terabytes. That's a large amount of personally identifiable information for a random hacker to gain access to. And he stumbled on this information. Can I just say that? He stumbled on it. So he didn't go looking for the information. Now, he put out a report about that particular bounty hunting he did and made a call for the database to be secured. And the response of the Nigerian government was to deny any intrusion on their systems, as they normally do. So I would just say that the Nigerian government in particular and other governments in Africa need to stop focusing on looking for more ways to surveil its citizens and find a way to better secure the information they already have on their citizens. I also think that by imposing registration for a lot of basic things like getting an ID and all of that, we exclude a large number of our population. Let me make an example. People who are not as educated and live in very remote areas where technology is not even being used on the scale that is being used in some other regions in Nigeria are automatically excluded when you say you must register, you must have NIMC before you register a SIM. These people don't even use the regular banking systems. So what you've essentially done is left them out of innovation that could potentially help them or potentially assist in enforcing or exercising some of their rights. So what I would say is, rather than looking for ways to surveil your citizens, find a way to secure the information you already have on them. There's a lot of it on different databases. Can we unify those databases? Is there a way that the information I've given for my BVN is matched to what I've given for NUC and can now be used without fresh registration for my voters registration? Is there a way that we can reach those people who don't even have access to this information, living in remote areas and affected by a lot of issues that the rest of us usually ignore? Is there a way to get to them and ensure that they're on the system? The best way to do that is to assure the citizens that their information is safe in your hands. If you cannot do that, then you basically lose the right to enforce backdoors into people's personal data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Worola. I think, Samuel, I'll come to you. What potential do you think is there for government in terms of managing the huge database it has of its citizens?
Well, I think government should consider the techniques that exist for securing data against unauthorized access as well as unauthorized modification or destruction. Not only should they employ encryption, but they should also ensure that maybe at the instance of collecting, they do tokenization. So instead of the individual being identified across board with their name, they may be identified with a random identifier or a unique identifier that point towards who they are. So I think with identification, we can't undermine its importance, or should I rather say verification of identification. There is definitely services where you ought to verify that you are who you are. But the importance of security is that if at all you place so much importance on verification of identity and then you undermine security, you open possibilities for social engineering. You open possibilities for instances where because you need a verification of identity in this way, then as a threat actor, they would be motivated to go and find ways to verify that identity one way or another, either by putting you in a position where you disclose your information without realizing, or having access to publicly available data. So in the instance where there is a breach and a government denies that there was that breach, it actually threatens verification of identity. To some extent, it also threatens encryption, because if at all I have encrypted access to a service and there is a breach that discloses the credentials for access to that service, let's say, for example, there's symmetric encryption being used, and in order to get into a service, I need to give a passphrase, which passphrase is used to now grant me or grant me access to a service. If at all there is a breach and the credentials to that access have been exposed, then it means encryption will unintentionally be undermined. So, or rather it would be weakened. So even if you have it, then it means that the person who is supposed to benefit from encryption will not benefit from it. So it's important that even as we look at encryption, we look at the other things that support it working. And one of the things that support encryption working is, of course, raising awareness to the users of systems. It's also taking responsibilities as the people that process data to ensure that we secure it adequately, because if you don't secure it, you could have an encryption algorithm there, but it may be bypassed by the fact that the information is leaked out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amelo. I think I'll just come back to Omolara, right? We've talked about the huge role encryption plays in terms of our digital economy and digital transactions, digital communications. Generally, what do you think are the risks? Because those counter arguments are still there. What are the we've also talked about the fact that having one backdoor for government is a backdoor for all other bad actors, right? But what other risk factors would you associate weakening encryption with? What do you think? What other risk factors do you think are there?
Thank you so much. I believe that weakening encryption undermines human rights. That has already been indicated and said earlier during the discussion. But also beyond that, it also makes it easier for malicious actors to gain access to people's personal information, and also leads to journalists' sources can no longer be protected, and they might actually face threats to their lives, their livelihoods. Also in situations of children and in situations of women, they may also be violated. They may also be abused because their data then becomes open to the public. I think one of the other question you asked initially about how does government ensure that databases are protected, it's the investments into security, like Samuel said, but beyond that is also having legislation in place to ensure that. So for example, in South Africa recently, we have the promotion of Personal Information Act, and the act was drafted to promote information of everyone. Business was supposed to take steps to ensure that our personal information are protected, promoted, and then they also make sure that they don't keep it for longer than necessary. Same applies to government. But the good thing about this particular act is that the awareness that was raised before the act was even was in place. So I think it took about like 5 or 10 years where we knew that it was Papaya Act coming out, the Promotion of Access Information Act. But it was not implemented. There were trainings to train government department. There were training to train business owners. There were training to train anybody that's taking any kind of data, and also training for individuals so that we understand the power behind our own data and how to make sure that that is actually promoted. So I think there's a need to actually invest in that. Also, there's a need to also make sure that encryption, we don't try and find a way to backdoors to encryption. We don't try and sideline encryption, but embrace it and educate individuals also as to the power behind their data, as how they can ensure that their information is encrypted and ensure that their data doesn't get into the wrong hands. Because another problem with data getting into the wrong hands is that, for example, when it comes to online fraud, and people have had their savings and life savings taken out. They wake up one morning, they have this amount of money in their account, they go to bed, they don't have anything in their account. So that's one of the side effects of not having encryption in place. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omolara. Greg, coming to you, what are the risk factors that can be associated with weakening encryption?
I think there are many. For example, if you're a child and you're trying to communicate with other children confidentially, and you can't because your communications can't be encrypted because of a government mandate, all of a sudden you're vulnerable. If you are, as I mentioned earlier, banking, and you're trying to secure your finances, they're put at risk by backdoors to encryption. If you're a child being educated at school, you count on there being an ability to communicate with the other kids and with the teacher without bad guys coming in and disrupting the class, and without the communications being vulnerable to other people. We use encryption all the time. It's absolutely essential to modern life. And I think that a lot of these governmental approaches to make it so it's harder or impossible to communicate confidentially, eventually they're going to fall to the wayside because people will demand the ability to communicate confidentially. And they'll ask the politicians, hey, you're trying to make it so I can't talk to my family privately. Why don't you put your communications out there so we can all see them? Because they're using WhatsApp, they're using Signal, they're using confidential means to communicate. Everybody needs encryption, including bad politicians.
Thank you so much, Greg. Samuel, yeah.
I think one of the risks of weakened encryption that is often overlooked is national security itself. Users, as we've been saying, need awareness of how they ought to behave in the digital space. A lot of our government employees use WhatsApp. If you weaken encryption on WhatsApp, then to some extent you would have weakened national security as well, because it's not like on that WhatsApp group they may not discuss government business. For us in Botswana, there have been instances where we were applying for our vaccination certificates, the electronic ones. We were applying for them through, Gmail, like a Gmail assigned account. It wasn't a government domain. It was literally Gmail by a government employee. And you can imagine if encryption is weakened in that regard, and as pointed out by the speakers here, when you weaken encryption, is not like the person who would be interested in it would just be government. Everyone else would be interested in it. Even someone who, may not have criminal intention, just finding out about what could be happening here and there. So one of the things we undermine about weakening encryption is that the government itself could also be, it could also be at risk, especially that in Africa, many of our governments are consumers of encryption. We don't manufacture it here. We use, AES developed by NIST. We use, all the encryption algorithms do not come out of here. So if at all they are going to be weakened one way or another, then it means we may as well be exposing ourselves to a risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Pretty valid and solid points. And the fact that the government is also at risk when they begin to think, of weakening encryption. And I know during the beginning of the conversation, something really valid that Greg said was the fact that we don't consider how often we use encryption, how big of encryption consumers we all are, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of risks attached to weakening encryption, and it shouldn't even be a consideration at all. Like for me, there's even no balance of rights, right? There's no conversation when it comes to weakening of encryption. But this brings me to Wurala, any insights on risk of weakening encryption?
I think to add to it, we'll be overflogging the matter. So I'll just allow us to.
All right, thank you. So, I'll come to you with my next question. I know you're like in the cybersecurity space, right? And a lot of the conversation here today has been of how important encryption is to protecting the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression online, right? But from a cybersecurity space, right? Do you think would you think that encryption should be considered as a separate right? So we leave, because we keep associating it to the right to privacy, but I think there's a lot more that encryption even does for us, right? And maybe separating it would mean that the government can no longer, because and another argument that regulators, law enforcement agencies, or government around the world could be that, there are other ways to also protect privacy that doesn't have to involve encryption, right? So would you consider bringing encryption or classifying encryption as a solid right? Would you think it would aid security in any way?
I'll just piggyback off something you've just said. If someone was to come to me today to say that there are other ways to protect my privacy without encryption, I would tell them that means they want to keep me off the internet, because that's the only other way to protect your privacy. If, without encryption, you need to be off the internet. Like Omolara had mentioned earlier in the webinar, she said, if you want to have a private conversation before the internet, you close the door, essentially. So I would say that there's no, at the moment, with the way the internet is going, we will get there. We may not be there, we may not be at the point where encryption is seen as a right. However, there are legislations that have been coming out recently that points to the fact that we're heading to a place where encryption becomes a matter of right when engaging on the internet. We have the GDPR, which has been in existence now for about 6 years, and we're having more and more countries sign on or adopt the principles of the GDPR, or even making their own copy of that regulation. For instance, in Nigeria, we have the NDPR. We have other forms of privacy regulations springing up across Africa, in Kenya, in Morocco, even in Rwanda. We have governments adopting or making their own data privacy regulation as more and more of their citizens engage online. So yes, I think we are going to get to the point where encryption becomes a matter of right. We may not be there yet, but we're heading there. And to just repeat again, the only other way to protect your privacy, apart from encryption, especially if you're interacting online, is to stay offline. And the world is moving to a point where that's going to be impossible to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Omolara. But coming to Samuelu and Omolara, because Omolara mentioned that because Omolara mentioned the fact that she's also a lawyer and Samuelu is also a lawyer. So I think really bringing the question to them would hit home. Like, what would you think about encryption becoming a separate standalone right of its own, so much that it's not tied to privacy and there's no argue back and forth, like encryption as a right on its own? So yes, Samuelu then will have Omolara answer.
I thought I would want to have the human rights expert come in first, so that perhaps I could hear what she has to say first. So can she go first? Because my views on this are a bit unconventional. I'm actually not for the right to encryption.
Okay.
But that's why I wanted her to come first. But I could go first if you want me to.
Okay, let's have Omolara go first.
All right.
Okay. So my view is a bit not totally far off from what Senelo is saying, but not also totally far from what Wurala is saying. So the way the space is made, we make laws, international human rights laws, is that it's easier to piggyback on the rights that have already been signed by about 168 countries. Now to start afresh, knowing fully well already that we have people that are not interested in this and they have invested interest. So you would have an international law that is not going to be signed, that is not going to be promoted, and it's going to be totally useless. And hence the reason I am for the fact that let's attach it to the fundamental rights that they've already signed on to. So the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights have 168 signatories out of 198 countries. So that gives us the idea that it's been universally accepted. So you can then tell your government that even though you're interested in national security, your obligation under this particular convention cannot be, you can't slacken that particular thing. And what the UN has actively done, which was for something like Greg mentioned, but in passing, but which is important, is that all these rights, given the trend that happens, UN brings out different general comments to strengthen the rights that exist. based on the circumstances we are in. So during COVID-19, they came up with different general comments to strengthen each of those things. So that is, for example, the Convention on Rights of Violence Against Women, for example, doesn't speak to domestic violence. But then over time, understanding the impact that this has, there has been a lot of general comments to attach and addend to that particular convention, making it stronger, making it relevant for the times. So like Rola said, eventually, maybe in future sometime, we might have a right to encryption, but with what we have now, we can actually advocate and lobby for rights for encryption to be introduced into privacy. Yeah.
Thank you, Amara. So we'll come to you now, and then we'll have Greg share insights on the same question too.
All right. Well, when I'm met with the question as to whether there should be a right to encryption, I often tend to wonder, should I look at it from the perspective of a right, that is a legal entitlement, or a privilege that should be enjoyed fundamentally by all, residents of a country? Or should we look at it from the perspective of a freedom that government should not interfere with its use? I tend to be of the view that it may work better as a freedom as opposed to a right, because I tend to wonder, what do we mean when we say a right to encryption? What should government do to ensure, because encryption inherently is a technical thing, it's a technical application, it's cryptography. So are we saying that there should be, when we say the right to encryption, do we mean that you have a right to, to have, safeguarded communications? So I tend to feel like it's already covered by rights that already exist. What we are trying to protect is already covered by, freedom of expression. It's already covered by the right to privacy. So my view is that, as the scholars have, indicated, encryption is a facilitator of rights that already exist. So I don't know what value would derive from making it a right. I also don't know the value would derive from making it a right, particularly because our need for the right is that, well, right now, are we saying we are not enjoying encryption? I think we are enjoying it, but the problem is that there is government interference. So are we saying when the right exists, there'll be no government interference? Well, there's already government interference on all the other rights that exist. So I think a right to encryption to me is something that may be more ceremonious than practical. It's the kind of thing where we say we are enjoying that right. It's like a tick box exercise for me. What I would want more is to see, emphasis on how government should act within derogations under each and every right that already exists, but not to make encryption a right on its own. Thank you.
I would put it this way. I agree with both of the prior speakers. I would put it this way. We don't have to wait for a new treaty on the right to encrypt, because we have existing rights recognized by treaty that can't be exercised without the ability to encrypt communications. They just can't be exercised in the modern world unless we have that ability. The way the UNOHCHR put it in a report that was issued just last month, they said, encryption is a key enabler of privacy and security online and is essential for safeguarding rights, including the rights to freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of association and peaceful assembly, security, health, non-discrimination. Encryption ensures that people can share information freely without fear that their information may become known to others, be they state authorities or cyber criminals. Encryption is essential if people are to feel secure in freely exchanging information with others on a range of experiences, thoughts, and identities, including sensitive health or financial information. Knowledge about gender identities and sexual orientation artistic expression, and information connection with minority status. We don't need a new treaty on encryption. We have existing rights that can only be facilitated with encryption because we're living in a digital age.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, everybody. Please, for our attendees, please feel free to drop your questions or your comments in the chat box so we could, share it and give the insights of our panelists. But we're rounding up, right? But we're rounding up already. I dropped so TechHive in collaboration with Ikigai worked on creating a guide on encryption to sort of create awareness and make it more to ensure people get a better understanding of the importance of encryption. But I think this brings me to final comments. We'll go from Omolara. What are your final comments or recommendations with regards to encryption, especially in relation to its importance to human rights and anonymity?
Thank you so much. I think my final comments will come from what the UN Special Rapporteur of Opinions said in 2015, that an individual cannot have a reasonable expectation that his or her privacy is being protected without the ability to control what information is shared about them and how that information is used. So it is your information to have. And as much as things are going online, we must not forget about the fact that the rights offline also exist online. And the reason I say that is that before now, when there was no internet, you literally would have to come to my bedroom to hear what I say with my husband at night. But now that there is WhatsApp and I want to share some information with him or with my family members, I should be able to do that without the fact that there is a particular lording over me. And I think importantly is something that I forgot, I can't pronounce the name properly. I'm sorry, I want to make sure I do that right. Semelo said, when he said that, national security is also being compromised when encryption is actually weakened. One of the case in point is, for example, when another country is spying on another country, which is deliberate to sabotage them on issues, and that then affects all our own national interests. And most importantly, I think national security shouldn't be viewed as a government thing. Like I said, we, the people, are also the government. So there is an important role for the civilians to play in this regard, and for the government to also understand the right of its citizen and also the role they play in actually ensuring that we have an institution that promotes human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wurala?
Yeah, for me, I will come from a security trainer point of view, where I would recommend that more people should be informed about the kind of encryption that is available to them in their interactions online. The best way to make anything popular is to let people know about it. The moment they know, the moment they understand the concept of encryption and how it protects their rights or how it facilitates the exercise of their state-given rights, then it's easier to get them to use digital services, only digital services that have encryption. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wurala. Greg?
I think the other speakers just put it so well. I don't have that much to add other than today is Global Encryption Day. It's a day to get up, get active, learn about encryption, and defend it. And you can learn more about how to do that by Googling Global Encryption Day, and up will come the Global Encryption Coalition website, all the activities that we have planned, some games that you can play about encryption, and ways to communicate with policymakers to defend encryption. the defense of encryption is a global necessity. And we at the coalition, we're happy to help bring policy proposals to us that are troubling, and we will act. So again, it's a day to celebrate encryption and a day to fight back on attacks on encryption.
Thank you so much, Greg. Samalo.
I think for me, my last words would be to add on to what Greg has said, that a day like this is necessary to bring about awareness. And this conversation is good because it's a step towards bringing that awareness. And this is the importance of awareness when it comes to encryption. We enjoy the benefits of encryption more from being empowered from an awareness perspective than being given a right? So you will find that even a journalist who may have a right to encryption in the constitution, but does not know how encryption actually works or what they can do to safeguard the communications they have with the source, would not use encryption. So I think there is a lot of awareness that has to be done to empower the benefactors of encryption at an individual level, at institutional level, so that we appropriately use it. I can give you one of the examples of what a lack of empowerment can do. You can find that in many organizations, there may be encryption for data in transit for email, that is TLS encryption, right? Transport layer security, but there may not be encryption for emails at rest. So then you'd find that you may be thinking that the channel that you are having for communication is secure. It may as well be, but the information as it is in your laptop is not secure, such that when your laptop gets stolen, that information can still be exposed. So it's for the people that are benefiting from encryption to know that I need to be able to protect information throughout its life cycle, whether it's in use, whether it's in transit, or any other state that information may be in. So I think this is a good conversation to have. And I think we should continue to ensure that people are educated about what encryption is, how encryption helps them enjoy all of the rights that are there. I think right now there is a protest going on at Iran. And one of the benefits of encryption could be that they could use a virtual private network, to be able to communicate with the outside world, to update that this is what is going on in Iran. In China, where there is censorship, it's also a place where you could use encryption to ensure that you relate with the outside world. So empowerment of the benefactors of encryption, or the individuals that need encryption, has to be done in order to enjoy this innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. It's been great having you all here today. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Worola. Thank you, Omolara. Thank you, Samuel. We've had a great session. Thank you for the insights you shared. And it's really amazing. And as Greg said, today's World Encryption Day, so it's a day to fight back. It's a day to share awareness. It's a day to post about encryption, or probably just share with someone who doesn't know or who doesn't understand how important encryption is. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our attendees. We're super, super excited that you took our time to join us. Thank you so much. And hopefully see you next year on World Encryption Day. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.